Okay. Well, welcome tonight, everybody that's on, and we appreciate your presence for this, our last session that we're doing with the Trinity of the Synod of the Trinity. I got that backwards, sorry. So this is actually the 7th session of the curriculum that our Addiction Ministry Network developed, and it is entitled Our Christian, well, I don't know the exact title, Our Christian Response, our congregational response to the community and how we might work with them. So I just want to remind you a little bit about the chat function. You may have to look a little bit to find it. I think most of us have been chatting a little bit now, but at least talking. But maybe at the bottom of your screen or the top of your screen, you'll find a chat function. If you click on that, you can address a comment to everyone if you would like, or you will see a listing as you use the drop down on there on the two. You'll see each person that's on here listed. You can send something privately to somebody if you care to. So just remember that if you want to say something and don't want to try to remember it, write it down, send it, and we'll monitor that as we go. So tonight we are looking at engaging the congregation within the community. And I've been one of the presenters that has been on 3 of the other sessions. I'm going to defer a lot of that talk to the other 3 presenters tonight, Reverend Sue Washburn, who is a pastor at the Reunion Presbyterian Church in Westmoreland County. Jessica Mccaffrey, I'll talk about a little bit more here in a bit, is with us. She is a certified recovery specialist and will be sharing her story with us tonight. And Reverend Alice Tondora, who is the pastor at the Johnstown, in Johnstown at First Presbyterian, is that correct, Alice? And if it isn't, she'll correct me. So welcome, everybody. Let's begin with prayer and take a moment to calm ourselves of the things that have been going on in our lives during the day. Lord Jesus, we seek to follow your example and show love and forgiveness to those around us. We confess, though, that sometimes we don't have the right words or know the best way to do that. So, Lord, help us to start those hard conversations and empower us to be agents of your healing. We ask you to be with us tonight to help us explore possibilities for how our congregations may work with those that are dealing with substance use disorders themselves or their family members or friends that are trying to help that person. We ask you to help us as Christians to know the best responses. We ask these things in Jesus' precious name. Amen. So just as a reminder that this is a safe place here, we ask you to, if you are caring to share information about yourself or another person, that know that what is said here can stay here. We prompt people to use the words "someone I know," whether they're referring to themselves or one of their loved ones or someone that they want to keep their anonymity safe. And also to take care of yourself. Those of us that are in this profession, that have been for a while, those that are dealing with substance use addiction, we need to take care of ourselves if we want to care for others. So please, if you need to, seek resources that we've shared with you to help yourself also. So the goals of these sessions, this one in particular tonight is that we'll recognize ways that we can engage our congregation to offer loving acceptance and support of individuals who suffer from a substance use disorder, as well as their families. But along with this goal, there's also big challenges. And we know that our churches tend to sometimes ignore the social disruptions caused by substance use disorder, often because they believe that they're powerless to make any positive difference in their community. We know that's not true. We know that silence is the enemy of substance use disorders, that we need to be able to talk about these things openly within our congregations. We need to be welcoming to those that enter our doors. And oftentimes we don't know who within our own congregation is suffering in silence. We need to make them feel that it is a safe place where they can find healing and hope themselves. So tonight, as we begin, we have with us tonight Jessica Mccaffrey. And Jessica, we want to welcome you. She is currently with Twin Lakes Rehabilitation Center in Somerset, Pennsylvania. She is a certified recovery specialist, and at Somerset, she acts as a substance abuse counselor. And she shared with us before that she's working with the adult population and certainly loves doing that. Prior to her experience at Twin Lakes, she was the coordinator of the Substance Abuse Helpline here in Westmoreland County. And Jessica, we want to welcome you, and we appreciate your sharing your story with us about your substance use disorder and your subsequent recovery, and how your faith has played a part in that.
Well, thank you for having me. I hope that you can hear everything well. All right, so I'm going to start off a little bit just telling you about what my life was like growing up, what it was like for me in active addiction, and what my life is like today. It's really important for me to talk about a month before I was born, and that's because I grew up in McKees Rocks, and the first thing on the front page of the newspaper that day was the Pope had been shot. But right underneath that was a picture of my mother, about 7 or 8 months pregnant with me, being arrested with a very large seizure of drugs. So I was born into this world. Both of my parents were addicts. My grandparents also suffered with alcoholism and addiction. I'm at least a second or third generation addict. So growing up, my mom was in court a lot. My father actually turned himself in and took the blame so that I was not born in the federal penitentiary. The first time I ever met my father was in prison, and he remained there for a very long time. But my mom, her disease really escalated at that time, probably due to shame and guilt, and a lot of mixed feelings going on at that time. So she was absent a great deal of my childhood. I was raised primarily by my grandparents, and as I spoke, they struggled with alcoholism and addiction themselves. Due to my mom not being there as much as I would have liked her to be, I suffered abuse in every way that there is as a child, from the neglect that kids receive. So moving forward, I grew up in McKees Rocks. I lived there until I was about 10 years old. My mother started dating my stepfather, who was from the Greensburg area. And my stepfather moved us up to this area, Greensburg area, when I was about 10 years old. I was a self-harmer. That's where my disease began. I had a lot of rejection issues, a lot of fear. I felt unloved, probably unlovable. And I just needed a way to get outside of myself, even as a kid. When I look back and I reflect, I never remember having the feeling of being satisfied, complete, whole, I always felt like there was something missing within me, even as a very small child. When I was maybe about 12 years old, my mother used drugs with me for the first time, and that's when my disease began. So immediately from the first time I used a substance, it was like love at first sight, because, you know, I had this fear of people. I had fear of rejection. I had so much pain that I carried inside of me, you know, from the abuse that I endured, and it made me numb. It made me not think about those things. It made me not care. It made me be able to talk to my peers and friends and socialize. And that's where it started. So I went to West Hempfield Middle School because we moved more toward the Hempfield area. And I can't remember what grade that I was in when I got caught getting high in the bathroom before school. And the amazing thing about it, it blows my mind today. At that time, you would think a guidance counselor, the principal, a teacher, somebody would have said, you know, what could be going on in your life that's so bad that you're using drugs at this age, you know, and that you're using them just to go to class. But they didn't. Instead, I was labeled bad. You know, I was a bad kid, and I was expelled from that school district. The only school that would take me was a Catholic school in Jeanette called Sacred Heart. And that was my higher power working for me way back then when I look and see. So I go to this Catholic school, and literally there were priests and nuns that taught there. And it was the first time ever I'd been taught about spiritual principles and faith and, you know, a God, Jesus, higher power, everything. But the problem is I was going home and the exact opposite of all of those things was going on in my house. I was the kid that grew up sitting in the back of bars. I was the kid that, you know, was home when there was adult things going on of all types. We're not just talking substance abuse. We're talking all the other things that are associated with it, what people do to find the ways and the means to get it, and that chaos. I grew up in that chaos, and I didn't have a choice. So I became very conflicted, and I didn't know who to believe. Do I believe this school and these priests and these nuns? Are they living right? Is this the right thing? Or do I believe my mom? Okay. So what happened for me, I like to say, is that's when self-will was born, because I made the conscious decision that I wasn't going to trust anybody. I just said, well, forget about it. Maybe I know what's best. Okay. And I'm not going to believe or listen or trust either side. And I'm just going to do what I want. And that's where it began. So at that school, they told me that if I did not get in trouble and I did not use drugs and I came to class and all of these things, that I would be released and be allowed to go back to public high school. And that was what I very much wanted. So that is when I learned how to manipulate and wear masks. So I learned how to fly under the radar. I learned how to put a smile on my face no matter what was going on in my house, or, you know, the night before, or what knew I was going to be going home to after school. I learned to smile and nod and say, okay. I learned how to be polite and likable and wear all these masks. So I did get released. I was allowed to go to Hempfield High School. During that time, my mom started to get very ill, couldn't figure out what was going on with her. It took years until finally she went to a specialist, and they had found that she had contracted a very deadly strain of hepatitis C, and that she was already in cirrhosis by that point. A doctor told her that if she would quit using and drinking, that she may live to see me graduate high school. So now here I am, a kid. I don't have any brothers or sisters. My grandmother has passed away, and I'm estranged from my grandfather due to the abuse that was found out that was happening to me as a child. So I have no family. I'm scared. I'm on my own. And, you know, I thought, okay, well, I guess I'm going to be with my dad. At that time, the plan was my father was going to be released when I was about 15 years old. So that is what my expectation was for the future. And I wasn't too thrilled with that either, because remember, my father, I might have seen a few times, and it was in the company of guards and, you know, through glass and things like that. So I didn't know the man, and I was very afraid. but at least it was what I could expect, so to speak. So I thought, but my dad did get released when I was 15 years old, and he thought he didn't need to work a program anymore because it had been so long since he used, and that he was going to be okay. And within a few short months, he picked up heroin again, and he died from a heroin overdose when I was 15 years old. So I was thrown through a loop. And I was told that I probably would end up like in a juvenile facility, is what would happen. And I thought at that point, that I have continued and continued to pay for the mistakes of everybody before me, and I was once again being, the bad kid. So I thought, because that's what everybody said, that's what the school said when they expelled me, that's what other people said when they found out about my behaviors. So that's what I believed and internalized. And I thought, well, if I'm going to be punished, then I'm going to act accordingly. So I kind of threw everything out the window. And when my mom made the decision that she still, even knowing that, my father passed away and I was going to be left on my own, and she made the decision that she was going to continue to use drugs and alcohol. And, the self-centered core of my disease told me that that was about me. And once again, she was rejecting me. All right. This was all about me. So I became very hateful. And she did use and continued to use until she passed away a few years later. She was lucky enough to watch me graduate high school, but wasn't around for very much longer. So I graduated in 1999 by literally the skin on my teeth from Hempfield. And right after, I was on my own. I was very afraid. I had to care for myself in every way, financially, emotionally, and it was scary. And I'm codependent because all dependents are codependent. So I was looking for security and safety and a sense of love and completion in another person. Okay. I did what a lot of young girls in my situation do, and I met a man that was quite older than me. I got involved right away, and within a few short months, I was pregnant. So I was pregnant with my first daughter. All I have at this point is a high school diploma, and that is it. And, within a few short months of being in this relationship and finding out I was pregnant, I realized that this person was probably not who I thought that he was. And the relationship became abusive and toxic, and I felt trapped. And I didn't have anybody to ask for help. I didn't know what to do. So I stayed in it. And after I delivered my daughter, and I'm going to tell you, I had done every drug that there was, but I had never been physically addicted to anything. It was a whole new ball game when we talk heroin. So I'm 21 years old. I have my daughter. I suffered from postpartum depression, but I didn't know it at the time. And I feel like I'm trapped in every way. And that was when someone that I trusted had come to me and said, I have something and it will make you feel better. And if you've taken pain pills before, which I had, this is just like that, only a lot cheaper and a lot better. And he injected me with heroin. And from the very first time I was addicted, I felt that sense again of like security and euphoria and peace, and all of my fear was taken away. All of the pain from everything that I endured up until that point that I had been carrying around for so long just magically disappeared, and it didn't matter anymore. Within a few months, I was physically addicted to heroin, maybe even less, maybe we'll say 1 month to 2 months. Every day I would have to use just to be able to get out of bed and take care of my infant. So things really went downhill, and I'm going to try to progress quickly because I know we don't have a lot of time. But I went on to have 2 more children. 2 of my 3 children were born addicted to methadone because I had to be put on it because I could not stop using when I was pregnant. It wasn't that I didn't want to. It was that I could not. And I made the best decision that I could at the time with what I had. But a lot of shame, a lot of guilt came from that. The 2 most heinous things I've seen in my life are an infant withdrawing from opiates and parents that just lost their only child due to this disease, which I'll talk about more at length in a minute here. So after I had my third child, I literally had just wanted to die. So much shame, so much guilt, but I didn't have the courage to do it. And I continued to use, just hoping every day that I wouldn't wake up. One night I had been up using all night, and I had been in a MAT program, and the type of addict that I was is I wasn't going to turn down a free dose of chemicals anywhere anyway. So I got behind the wheel. I went to this facility I had dosed, and I fell asleep at the wheel on the way home. I wrecked across 4 lanes of Route 30 traffic and into the gas company that's right in Jeanette off of Route 30. I almost blew the building up, and I had to be life flighted. They had to cut me open in a life flight helicopter to put a port into my heart, to be able to give me, Narcan, blood, fluid, whatever I needed to save my life at that point. Withdrawal actually woke me up out of a coma. I was in a coma. I woke up. I had multiple surgeries, unrecognizable. It was that bad. And the withdrawal is what woke me up. And once again, labeled bad, not sick. So I wake up in Pittsburgh, no idea where I am. First thing I say is, I'm sick. You have to give me something. I'm sick. And it was a young doctor, and he looked at me and he said, even after days of you being out, if I were to give you anything other than Tylenol, you would die. And the insidious nature of this disease is, I picked up the telephone. I called somebody. I made them rip all of the ports and tubes and everything out of my body. And I was high before I left the parking lot of that hospital in Pittsburgh. So I'm going to move forward into 2011 in April. So I finally exit this relationship because I know at this point I'm going to die. And I decide I'm going to give it one more shot, one more chance because of these kids. And I ended up meeting a young man from Harlem, and he was in my area. And he was running around doing, the things that we do when we're using and selling drugs. And the next thing you know, he ended up getting into a fight with another drug dealer in front of my home on Western Avenue in Jeanette, and shots were fired. And it was midnight when I believe it was Corporal Rivardo at the time, I'm not sure, from the Jeanette Police Department called me and said I'd better turn myself in. When I walked into the police station that night, they told me I was being booked on conspiracy for attempted murder and attempted aggravated assault, and I was looking at 20 to 40 years in prison. I had been in trouble a few times, but I'd gotten away with a slap on the wrist. This time that was not happening. I had Judge Bell, and he didn't even give me a bond at that time. So I sat in jail, and I was forced to sit there. And I knew what was coming. I was going to have to detox. I was terrified, but I knew it was what needed to happen. And for the first time, I found something I was afraid of. I wasn't afraid to die. I welcomed it at that point. I was afraid for my kids to have to come and see me in a jail cell like I had to do. I was afraid that I was going to have to watch them try to navigate this world without a mother and on their own like I did. Only I was going to have to be here to watch their pain. I wasn't going to get the coward's way out. So I remembered that thing in that Catholic school that they taught me about. And for the first time, I had nothing to lose. I had said a few foxhole prayers before that, like, get me out of this, I'll never do it again. But for some reason, my prayer that night was, make me okay with this. Not get me out of it, but make me okay with it. And that was what God did for me. He made me okay with it. So I detoxed in that prison cell for over 30 days. It was terrible. I was so ill, I hallucinated at times. But when I started to feel better, they brought in 12-step meetings into the prison and had women talking about their experience with substances. And it was the first time somebody told me that I didn't have a moral deficiency. I had a disease, and there was treatment for it, and that you could live with addiction. I thought the way out was to die because that's what I had seen. So I did that. I went to Bible study in the jail. I went to chapel, all of those things. And I prayed the entire time I was there. I ended up being found not guilty and acquitted on all charges about a year, maybe a year and a half later. I went to those 12-step meetings and I found those women. I did what they told me to do. I got a home group. I got a sponsor, all these things. And I didn't pick up no matter what. My first position that I ever did in recovery was as a volunteer in the Westmoreland County Prison, and it was working with the women that were struggling with drug and alcohol abuse. And the amazing thing was, is that a lot of them knew me. They had been in jail with me, or they had been in trouble with me at some other point or somewhere. So I wasn't someone that was like reading something I learned out of a book or telling them how bad I used to be. A lot of them seen it for themselves. They witnessed it. So I thought it was helping them, but it was really helping me. As a result of that service commitment, I was given a free opportunity to receive an education through Sage's Army as a certified recovery specialist. I work a lot with Sage's Army, going into schools and speaking during Red Ribbon Week and things like that, talking to the kids about my experience. The amazing thing is West Hempfield has had me back quite a few times to stand on that stage and tell my story. And it was, how did we fail you? Now, not, you were bad, but what could we have done differently? And I get to do that today. But anyways, so recovery wasn't easy for me. I had a lot of bad things happen. My stepfather ended up passing away. I had less than a year clean. That service commitment in the prison is what kept me clean. I knew that if I did not show up on Monday nights, that the women were going to know why. It was because I used. And they were going to think that the program and my higher power didn't work, and I knew that wasn't true. I knew that they did. And if I used it, was because I made a decision to get high. For me, I had no problem letting myself down. But when I had to represent something larger than me, I couldn't do that. And I stayed clean because of that commitment. I had a sponsee at a certain time in the program. You take on sponsees. I had this young lady who came into the rooms who also said, hey, I've seen you before. I knew what you were like. I need you to be my sponsor. I need you to help me. This young lady was deaf and she had a heart problem. And she had to have multiple surgeries by the time she was in her early 20s. She kept relapsing due to the medications that she had to take. It was very unfortunate, but I did not believe in quitting her. We had gone to Keystone Beach a few years ago. I had picked her up, had no idea that she had been using beforehand. I couldn't communicate with her because I had to watch the road and she was deaf. And it took us to get there. And I'm carrying chairs and books and things. Before I look over at her and I realized that her gait was off. She was not balanced, not stable, and that she was under the influence of something. So I asked her to take off her sunglasses. She did. I said, "You're high." She said no, that she wasn't, I told her we needed to leave and she didn't want to do that. I called my sponsor at the time. He said, tell her that if she doesn't get in your car in 5 minutes, you're leaving and she'll have to find her own ride home. I turned my back for just a few minutes to take the books and the chairs and stuff back to my car. I left one chair with her sitting in it and I told her, stay right here. All right. I'm going to be right back. All right. And we're leaving. In those few minutes, she had wandered away. So when I returned to the chair and she wasn't sitting in it, I just assumed that she went to the bathroom or the concession stand because it was right next to us. Only a few minutes had gone by. She couldn't have gone that far. And I sit down, and all of a sudden a woman come running up, screaming on the beach to call 911. Somebody was drowning. So I was the one that pulled her out of the body out of the water that day. I tried to resuscitate her. It was too late. I had to be the one to call her parents and tell them that they had to meet me at Latrobe Emergency Room Hospital, crying, begging me to know what was wrong their entire way there, and knowing I couldn't tell them. I couldn't tell them. They had to get there safe, and then they did. And when I told that mother and that dad that they just lost their only child in her 20s without ever being married, without ever having a child, anything, the cry that was let out, I think even the doctors and the nurses were crying and in tears. That scream, I'll never forget it. And I was going back to school at that time for business. And that was when I decided to change my major and to go back for psychology in hopes to work as a drug and alcohol counselor. That service commitment in that prison kept me clean through that experience, which was by far the most painful thing that I had gone through up until that point. About a year later, I got my first job in recovery, and that was working at Westmoreland Community Action. They had started a helpline for substance abuse in Westmoreland County, and I started off as a CRS while I did that, and I was going back to school. Within just a year, I was promoted to the coordinator / supervisor for the helpline. And I worked there for over a year until the program closed due to funding issues and such. So today I'm at Twin Lakes facility. I'm a counselor there in their adult residential program. At one point I lost custody of my kids because I was in jail. Never, even knew if I would get them back. But through the things that I was taught in the program and staying clean, it took over 3 years of jumping through every hoop in the system, but I was able to get my children back. I was able to go back to school more than once to one university. I was able to get a home on my own, and I got to lead Girl Scout troops, which is amazing to me because a judge at one point said, "You're not even responsible enough for your own kids." I remember when I took them on a sleepover at the zoo, and I'm looking around thinking, don't these moms know who I am? That they're trusting me with their children. The beautiful, beautiful gifts of recovery. The women in my life that I've got to watch succeed, stay clean, go on to get their kids back, become mothers, become productive members of society, become Christians, do kind, do good in this world. Some of them have even gone on to become CRSs and go back to school themselves and work in recovery. That has been the biggest blessing. The service that I do today, that hole that I talked about, I had said that I never felt satisfied. I always felt like something was missing. I was incomplete. That has been filled today. And it's with service work. I truly believe that the only way that I could honor my mom and my dad and my grandparents and all the people that I've lost in my life as a result of this disease is to do what I do. And that's to help another addict get another day clean and to share my story. To share the fact that any addict can quit using, can lose the desire to use, and find a new way of life. For me, I happen to be that any addict. I, on my own, wasn't even able to stop using when I was pregnant, but with the help of God and with a fellowship, the things that I've gotten to do today are amazing. And the biggest thing is educating kids and telling them my story. That they don't have to go down the road that I did, that it does start with tobacco. That is the gateway drug, and to listen to their parents. Parents, teachers, counselors, principals, they're not the enemy like we think when we're so young, and let them know that they're there to help. So,
Jessica, thank you so much. That is quite a story. And I'm sure that people probably will have some questions for you. I would like to, let's move on to a little bit so that we can hear from Alice about the things that she has been doing as part of her ministry. And then maybe what we'll do is then come back to the two of you for discussion. How does that sound?
Sue, you have some good things on your slide. So why don't you hit those and I'll hit mine pretty quick. I don't want to lose what you have.
Okay. All right, that's fine. One of the things that I did want to share with folks are what we are doing as part of the Redstone Presbytery Addiction Ministry Group. Folks have kind of been asking what kinds of things can churches do? What are some of the things that we can do together? What are some of the things that a church can attempt to do on its own? So let me see if I can just get those up here. The inspirational verse for this is from Micah. And listening to Jessica speak, I think that, so many of us want to do something. And the familiar verse is, "O people, the Lord has told you what is good, and that this is what he requires of you, to do what is right, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. And that has kind of informed the work that we've been trying to do as a ministry group, as the Redstone Addiction Ministry Group. Here are some of the things that we have been working on, that we have done together. And there's some things that you can do too, things that you can actually do in church this Sunday. Just start the conversation. Being intentional and inclusive is part of what we need to be as churches, especially when we do prayers of the people. We can mention people who have addiction and other challenges. And another thing that we've done is trying different sources for sermons. The Recovery Bible and the Big Book, AA's Big Book, have a lot of wonderful stories of recovery, which in a lot of ways are stories of the gospel, stories of redemption. And one other thing you could do for this Sunday is get pamphlets and flyers from local agencies and make sure they're in your church, someplace where they can be seen and where people can grab them and take them. But your ministry doesn't have to stop there. There are things that you can do over time, like using recovery language in worship, including the Serenity Prayer that we use to close out this gathering. You can also talk to people and families about addiction and invite testimony. We have had some healing services in the Presbytery, and the biggest part, and part of the reason I wanted Jessica to join us today, is the most powerful thing that we have is somebody's story. And if there's somebody in your congregation who is willing to share their story and give that as a testimony about how God has been working in their life, that is probably better than somebody talking about addiction and substance use disorder, having somebody talk about it from their own experience. There are a lot of churches who are already doing really good ministries around the area. And we don't have to reinvent the wheel. Celebrate Recovery, hosting an NA or an AA meeting. There are lots of things that we can do and lots of things that we can learn from other people. So we, don't always think it's up to you to create something. Look at what other churches are doing. Look at what's working well in your area. And the other thing is, when you get started, make sure you keep good boundaries. One or two people can take up a lot of time, attention, and resources from a church. So you do have to think about what those boundaries might be. We have, as a group, partnered with other churches, as I mentioned, for healing services. Each one had a slightly different flavor depending on the congregation. We created online devotionals, an online devotional for Lent, and it was specifically about recovery, and we posted it on Facebook every day. We can work with the funeral directors in our area to offer pastoral care, because oftentimes the funeral directors are hit with the opioid crisis as well. Another thing that we've done at our churches is offer Narcan training to the community. We have done this as individual churches, as small groups of churches, and the ministerium in Mount Pleasant, where the church I serve is, we did it as a ministerium at our Lenten services. We just held a Narcan training before the Lenten service for anybody who wanted to come. And we also have partnered with other groups that are helping those in recovery. We gathered small little shampoo and soap and Bibles and paper and pens for a group that provides them to people who are going into recovery homes. And the woman who runs it said, she said, when I realized that sometimes people were sharing toothbrushes, I felt like I had to do something. And that was something that was pretty easy to do. So we did partner with them to provide some things. And a lot of our churches really excel when it comes to gathering things like that. We can make a big impact that way. And I just breezed through those real quick, but they will be up, and you can watch the video on YouTube on the Synod of the Trinity. channel on YouTube if you want to get some of these down, or if you want to send me a chat, I can email you some of these things that we have been working on. So that's it, a quick rundown. And Alice has, she's hosted a healing service at her church. She is now, I think, been involved in doing a Bible study at a recovery facility. So I'm going to let Alice tell you what her addiction and substance use disorder ministry has looked like.
Thanks, Sue. I have slowly become more and more involved in addiction ministry, and there's one here, faith-based, called Peniel. And I contacted them, and with a lot of time, they need to get to know you, but I've been able to teach a class called Healing Damaged Emotions. And it's completely grounded in scripture and also brings in coping skills and basic mental health. And I would recommend it highly. You, of course, with any curriculum have to, some things need to be taken out and you can pull others in. But it addresses issues like perfectionism and making excuses and low self-esteem and what the Bible tells us about each of those. And to ask thought-provoking questions and get folks talking. And it was in that process that I learned probably just as much as the ladies did. But Bible study is really, I'm passionate about it. And I was thinking Bible study in terms of addiction ministry. The Psalms of Lament. We don't use those nearly enough. In fact, we stay away from them on purpose because they have a lot of uncomfortable emotions. We don't know what to do with them. And so if we can get into the Psalms of Lament and let people know that it's okay to have such raw emotion before God, and that it is through that we become to a greater trust. And so people can pray those Psalms of Lament on behalf of somebody else who is struggling, even though you might not be going through that yourself or feeling like the enemy is after you. You can pray those for someone else who in that moment cannot pray, can intercede for them. Can write your own Psalms of Lament, but it has to be from our own perspective. I could not sit down and write a Psalm of Lament from someone who has a substance use disorder. But I could write it because of the empathy that I have in the community of what I've seen, the struggles and the pain people have. And maybe because of conditions that lead to it, like economic losses and job problems. So the Psalms of Lament are just vital. And especially, again, I had someone just recently mention to me, well, it's not okay to be angry at God like that. Well, yes, it is. If David was, we can be too. And that can be very healing for everyone who has a heart for the addiction problem. I want to skip to, I'm not sure how much time we have. Sue, how am I doing?
Let's see. We have about 15 minutes.
Oh, that's better than I thought.
Yeah. So we can hopefully have some time for discussion at the end. But
okay, great. So I'm still going to move quickly because discussion really is important. But as far as Bible study, we need to get out and do and to serve in the community. But we have to remember there's something that we offer that others don't, and that's the gospel. And we need to be studying the word and in the midst of it and praying. And there are certain themes that are obvious: grace, mercy, do not judge, love one another, justice. But then I got to thinking about evil, chaos, powers, and demons. But be careful here. We don't want people thinking about glowing eyes and exorcisms. But it acknowledges that substance use disorders, it's a power, it's a strong one, and it seems to have a life of its own that can't be controlled, and it's destructive in its own right. And other themes don't give you that, like demons, powers, chaos, and evil. It helps us to get beyond what Jessica said of having a substance use disorder, that it's a moral failing, because it's not. And so looking at it from this other perspective can help people to see that. And I thought just quickly about the healing of the Gerasene demoniac. No one had the strength to subdue him because of the power of the demons within, even though they had tried in many ways. And there are loved ones who've tried in many ways to help someone who struggles in this way that they can't. It's painful to watch the demoniac hurting himself. He says, the demon says, my name is Legion. It just seems like the substance use disorder goes on and on. But Jesus ultimately has power. So all these stories, especially in the Gospel of Mark, showing Jesus' power over the supernatural, has a huge message for those who are learning about, struggling with, and have any interest and passion about substance use disorders. There are a couple other things I've done. Narcan is a 12-step program, and it is for family members and friends of those who struggle with addiction. And there aren't as many as you'd think. I looked on the website, narcan.org, and there was only one in Cambria County and not one at all in Johnstown. It's easy to form a group. If you go on the website, it tells you how, but you need to have a leader who's been there, done that, who knows what it's like, who can moderate the group. And many times they have said to one another, I couldn't make it through if it weren't for you. Because not only is there someone to listen who understands, but also they have tips, they have suggestions for one another. They uphold one another when they do something really difficult, like saying, I'm not going to bail you out of jail. So Narcan is an incredible organization, and I'd suggest if you don't have a group near you, consider maybe hosting one at your church and pursuing that. And then the other is a Blue Christmas service that is, it's for anyone who struggles during the holiday season, who is sorrowful for any way. But this, with the Cambria County Drug Coalition, we have a faith-based subcommittee, and we sponsored it, particularly focusing on those who were sad, have a difficult time because of addiction, and the pain and the loneliness that's just amplified during the holidays, especially if there's been a death. So it's very contemplative. The quiet hymns, it begins with lament and it goes to hope. You can't just stay in that lament, and it comes to a place of peace at the end. If it's within Presbyterian churches or Protestant churches, of course, communion, that adds so much too. But here it was both Catholic and Protestant, so we did not do communion. It's always good joining ecumenically to offer such services. So these are some things that I'm passionate about, and I have seen that have been meaningful to people here in the Johnstown community.
Okay, thanks, Alice. I guess at this point, we can open this up for discussion. These are our last 10 minutes together. And so if you have any questions for Jessica or for those of us who are on the Redstone committee, or for Alice and what she has done with her Bible study and the things that she has done, let's just open it up and see what questions you might have. Jessica, I'm going to start off with a couple of questions that have come up, and one of them, and maybe you can help us. One of them is, how do you say no lovingly when people ask for money or for help, or like how can we as pastors or lay people who are leaders in the church, how do we know where to draw the line, and how would you advise us when it comes to working with people with substance use disorders? Oh, you know what, let me unmute you, and then well, let's see, hang on a second. Okay, and Betty, you may have some thoughts on that too. Go ahead, okay. Jessica.
I literally have told people that there's nothing that I will not do to help them get to treatment if they're willing to go to treatment. So, that's a line that I draw, is they have to be willing to do some type of treatment at that point. And then there are certain things that I will do to help them. Handing them money is not an option. Okay. Buying them food, I've done that. I will go to the grocery store and I will buy food and I will drop it off. Buying items, things like that. Handing them money, no, not an option. But I tell them too that, unless you are willing to go to treatment, I can't help you.
Okay. Any other thoughts on that one?
Yeah, this is Betty. Jessica, thank you so much for sharing your story. I loved your experience, strength, and hope, and thank you for bringing that up. I have loved this. You ought to do this every week, so this is that. And it is very difficult, and that's why getting help in the rooms of Al-Anon and Nar-Anon and finding coaches and finding family members that have experience, because there's a fine line between enabling someone in their addiction and helping them get out of their addiction. Mm-hmm. And sometimes with families, it is so blurred when you have a loved one in active addiction. So you really need help, and that's where the networking comes in so important. And listen to the people that have been there and have the expertise. And because I have stories of making incredibly foolish decisions because I just didn't know any better, and I thought I was doing the right thing. I didn't know to listen to the experts, and now that I do, and now that I am, it makes a huge bit of difference. But once again, Jessica, thank you so much.
Oh, sure. Thank you for your service.
Does anybody else have questions or thoughts or reflections on what we have shared during this time together? Elaine, I think you're talking, but I'm not hearing you. Can you try again? Nope. Okay. Any other, Elaine, I couldn't tell. Can you give me a thumbs up? Were you trying to talk? Yes? Yes. Okay, so let me try this again. Elaine, try one more time. Yeah, we're just not hearing you. Ken, your mic is off. Did you have a question?
I got 6.
6, good.
No,
Elaine,
no.
Just real quick.
Jessica.
Elaine, try writing your question in chat. Can you send us the chat?
No. Jessica, referring to people with the disorder, what's a non-judge? I mean, I heard you use the term addict. I avoid using that. How do we refer to persons in the disorder? I mean, what would be
individuals diagnosed with substance use disorders?
They want to hear me call them that?
That's the politically correct terminology. How about that?
I mean, if I'm talking to you, that's what I would say.
Well, because first you want to identify them as an individual that has a problem with substances. When you say an addict, that's like putting that addiction before them as a human being. Yeah,
that's what I'm hearing.
But
do I have to let you acknowledge? Do I have to let you self-acknowledge first?
What do you mean?
To let you admit that you are a use disorder person?
Well, you certainly can probe people and prod and get them to draw the connections on their own. However, until they're willing to admit it themselves, they're not going to get the help that they need.
I'm also thinking of the role of being a pastor versus a counselor intervener.
Okay.
That role's different for me.
Yes.
Okay. That's helpful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Sue, if I may make one other comment. This is Betty again.
Yes, Betty.
Have any of you reached out to Faith Partners it's a wonderful organization. The Gold Project in Lancaster County has really stepped up, and they've done a lot with it. And basically, it's a fabulous resource, great training, and it's offered almost free or at a minimum. And it's I put it up on the chat for everybody, faithpartners.org. I would recommend that you hit that website to take a look around. And because I'm in the midst of doing it now, and the training materials are just it's fabulous. And one of the things they do is they have a congregational survey that they encourage churches to do. The ministerium that I'm associated with, they're doing it with their congregations. And it's amazing the misconceptions and the that a lot of our people have towards substance use disorder.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that was something that we are discovering. Linda is currently teaching using the curriculum that we have developed at her church. And Linda, I think one of the things you shared with us was there were a lot of misconceptions.
Yes, that's absolutely correct. It's been a small group, but even if it's one, it's successful. I've had 3 individuals that have continued on. We are going to complete our last session, this session, next week. So in the 6 times, we've talked about what is substance use disorders. Even the fact there's so much misconception about it being a choice. So many people say it's a choice, and why don't they just quit? Learning about the brain-based disease has been so enlightening for these folks. So, in fact, one of our people was our lector and started out the service this past week, and she just said, "You need to come to this." She said, "I've learned so much." She said, "I've understood so much. I had so many misconceptions." One of the other fellows is in on our session, and I heard that he did a little talk there at the session meeting to inform them how knowledgeable, how much knowledge he gained from it, and his attitude has been 180 degrees. I mean, he's going the other way. So I feel very good about that, because they are our apostles, and they are going to be the testimony to others. And we hope to run that again. I'm looking forward to doing it one more time. I have one of the girls in our church is a nurse practitioner that works at the VA, and her clientele has largely been individuals in recovery, not only with substances, but other issues. So it has been really, really good in having her knowledge and my knowledge both, and being able to facilitate that. So we're blessed.
Okay. And we're now at 8 o'clock. What I would like to do is go ahead. In just a minute, I'll put up the Serenity Prayer, and we will all turn on our mics and say that together. Then the last slide will be numbers that people can call for help should anybody be in that position. And if you would like to provide any feedback via the chat, we here at Redstone would greatly appreciate that. This is new territory for a lot of us. We have a lot of people bringing diverse experience with substance use to the table. We're trying to figure out where God is calling us, and how we can be apostles to other churches and other organizations. So please know that we value your thoughtful criticism. We value pointing out anything that we did well that you would replicate. Let's go ahead and close in prayer. Okay, let's make sure the microphones are off and let's begin. God, grant me the serenity
mind to accept that which cannot be
I
changed.
cannot change.
Courage to change that which can be changed, and wisdom to know one from the other.
Amen.
And we have numbers for help if you are somebody who needs help. Again, thank you everyone, especially to Jessica, who came into the Presbytery office and shared a very powerful story. Thank you for the work that you do. Betty, great to have you on board. Hopefully we can incorporate some of your thoughts and ideas into our ministry, and maybe we can start something that's more than just Redstone Presbytery, but can encompass various presbyteries. Ken, if you'd be interested as well, that we'd love to have some meetings and see what we can make of it. So thanks everyone. God bless you all and have a good night.
Thank you all so much. Good night.
Good night.
Thank you. Sue, you want to end the recording?